Welcome back to Kingdom Outcasts. Today is episode number 19. I'm Brendan.
I'm Greg.
I'm Jordan.
So our topic today is something that's been relevant for us going on, talking about how to get started into reading comic books. So it is such a vast world, and obviously it's been going on for years and years and years. So for a novice, it can be kind of a daunting task to get started in there. So Greg is probably the most experienced in this area, so he's going to lead our discussion, I think. And Jordan and I have prepared kind of questions and topic points that we can discuss that will hopefully help you guys if you are looking to start getting into comic books, which really there's no better time than right now, because we're kind of in between phases, especially in Marvel. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I guess let's just talk about in general, where would you suggest someone start? Or like if you're, let's say, how do you purchase books? Like what are your different options of where you can get different issues?
Yeah, I was going over this one. Your local comic book store is going to be your best bet for new issues and recent issues. For a lot of older stuff, you can go through someone's back books, like boxes full of stuff, like at Rick's. But you're not going to find everything that you want to find. You're just going to have to dig through until you find something that piques your interest. So if you're looking for something specific, online's going to be your best bet. Where you can actually see the covers and read the description of the comic, stuff like that. I hate to take away from, physical brick and mortar place, but if you're not looking for anything that current or new, it's kind of hard to find.
So in my brief time, that's kind of how I've been approaching it. If I'm looking for something that has just released, I'll go to the physical store to get it, quicker than I can online. But like if I'm trying to, for example, I had Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 5. The shop didn't have 2 through 4, so I went online and that's where I purchased those.
Even when Jordan and I went last night, they had, 3 and 5 on the shelf?
Yeah, it was very sporadic of what they had.
And they've been out of those issues for a while because they were that popular. It just sold out like that, and they couldn't get them back in. The distributor's not sending them back out.
Yeah.
So if you run into something like that, you're gonna have to resort to online.
So, if obviously your comic book shop local would be your first choice, I guess, or your best bet on finding new comics or whatever. If you need to go online, is there any particular websites? Amazon, that's where I was looking at. Amazon had some, but are there any particular just like comic specific websites that are good to go to?
Marvel.com, DC.com. You can order them straight from the source.
Well, that works.
Yeah.
And you can also, if you're not caring much about, I have the physical copy, you can read comics online. Marvel Unlimited, it's $30 a month or something like that, and you can read as many comics as you want. And Unlimited, that's the name.
We might want to cite that because I think it's way cheaper than that.
Oh, okay.
I think it's like $9.99 a month.
See, that's even better.
So that's all digital copies.
Yeah, all digital copies, yeah. And you can just hit download, kind of like you would an audiobook on Amazon. You hit download, it downloads to it. You can keep it as long as you want. You can keep it, delete it, however you want to do it.
I did see when I was looking on Amazon, because I just Googled it, and Amazon was one of the ones that popped up. You could download it to your Kindle. So If you had a Kindle, I'm sure you could do it with an iPad as well. You could download it straight to one of those devices. So
see, I used to. There was a comic series. Alien something. It was an Alien franchise comic, and I got started late in it. I think it's picked up with like issue 5 or 6. So I tried to go back and find the rest of them, and I couldn't. But I found them all on Amazon except for one issue. And I ended up just YouTubing the issue, and someone had page by page scanned into a video. So I never got to actually hold it or read it, but I did watch the comic on YouTube.
That is highly illegal. I do not suggest that in any way whatsoever.
I could never find that one issue. So that was pretty cool. But Amazon really has been the best place for me to find comics that I could not find anywhere else.
So I recently went through this, like I said, that Guardian series, Amazon didn't even have them. So I went to my comic store, or mycomicshop.com.
Right.
Very old school looking website, but it got the job done. So you could pick based on the condition that you wanted them. I just wanted to read them, so I went for like very good. And, you know, I didn't need mint condition for any of them. And I paid at most like $4 per issue, which is pretty on par with what you would pay at a store.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that you decided what, I guess, story arc you want to read, what run you want to read, what are you looking for? What's the terminology? Obviously, there's issues and volumes and everything like that. So what are you looking for when you go to find issue number 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever number you're missing?
You just put an issue. Like, if you're looking for, like, I have 1, 2, and 8. You just search up and by, I'm looking for Guardians number 5.
Yeah, like, explain what an issue is and stuff like that.
Issue
Because I know I was confused whenever I first started looking for a particular one.
Right. If you're looking for an issue, like number 1, number 2, number 3, or just single entries into a particular comic.
So they're almost like chapters.
Essentially. Or you can think of them as a movie or an episode. I always call them episodes by accident when I'm referring to them. Like, oh yeah, remember that last episode? They're issues. But I kind of like, if you're watching a TV show and you're watching this episode, that was episode 7, the next episode is number 8. It's kind of the same thing with comics. They're self-contained stories in a broader story arc.
So I know another term that comes up often are trades.
Right.
So
and I wrote this one down so I wouldn't forget. A collective issues in either paperback or hardcover.
Yeah. So.
And that can be done by story arc. It can be done by creative team. It can be done any way like that.
Yeah. So I have this Hawkeye versus Deadpool, and it includes issues number 1 through 5 of this run.
I think that was
what the terminology is
short run. I think that is all 5 of the issues that came out.
Yeah. So I think it's important for our listeners to know that if it's a run that has already completed,
right?
They're not issuing any more new issues, episodes, whatever you want to call them. A trade can be a good option to get them all in one place, maybe at a good value. You're just going to have to do the math and compare.
Right.
But it's at least going to ensure that you have the entire run in one place.
I wrote something good down for the when we talk about runs. It can be considered the completion of the story from like 1 to 7. Like maybe that's the end of the issues. So it can be the work of a creative team or a numbering scheme. Like if they go 1 to 7 and start back over at 1 for whatever reason they want. They just kind of soft reboot and they just start back at 1 and just continue the story but don't change the numbers. Or say Jordan's writing 1 through 8 and then I come in at issue 9 and go to 9 to 21. That's his run, that's my run. Is that you may be able to find his in a trade and then mine in a trade separate because we're 2 different creative teams.
Interesting. Is that common though?
No, but there are sometimes when you're reading a comic and you're like, you go through and all of a sudden the drawing styles change or how they speak change, and you can when you look at it and they or all of a sudden this story is going in this direction and then you think it's kind of wrapping up and then it goes in totally off the wall different direction. They probably change creative teams. They probably have a different vision of the story that they want to go in. That happened with Cable. I was reading Cable in the first, 9 issues or something like that. It was a story arc of him chasing some bad guy through time. And then all of a sudden, he gets together a whole new team and they start doing something else. It's because the writer got fired. And they pick somebody else up.
I don't know if this is the perfect time to bring it up, but I know I wanted to hit on it eventually. how do you get the right mindset to understand that all these different runs are not what you would consider like canon, or they don't all go together in any way whatsoever?
Stories, all of the stories they're all canon, but it kind of depends on what you want to believe. How you which this person died in this one, but they live in this one. How do you there's no real true balance to anything.
So, I mean, even though it could be all the same characters, each run, I guess,
Right.
could be its own self-contained story.
And there are a lot of them that are like that. Spider-Man Renew Your Vows. Up until the last issue, it was self-contained. It was in its own world that had nothing to do with anything. No blockbusters had anything to do with it. It had nothing to do with any blockbusters. And then Spider-Geddon came in at the last issue of Renew Your Vows. They opened up a portal to that world and brought it into the fold.
So I think it's maybe just important to remember that if you're like most of us, and the movies were the first thing that you were exposed to, you're going to realize that they're not just pulling information straight from the comics.
Right.
Like they're pulling from all these different runs.
Yeah, and that was one of the notes that we had, was what do comics have to do with the MCU? Not jack.
It's just a source material.
Yeah, it is the source material. Like, you'll find a story in the MCU that takes from 7 different versions of the story not even from the story, but from 7 different pieces of every other story that they can probably think of. Like, oh, we've got this idea from this one, we got this idea from this one, we got this version from this one, and then they just made their own original story for the MCU.
Yeah. So I think a good example is like we were texting the other day that in this Hawkeye vs. Deadpool that I read, they keep mentioning this love interest that Spider-Man has with Black Cat.
Yeah.
So in that, they're referencing another run where Peter Parker is an adult,
yeah,
and he's got love interest. But there could be another Spider-Man run going on right now where he's still in high school.
Correct.
And you just got to...
Someone else, he's just trying to work through life. Yeah.
So you just can't put anything into a box.
No.
You just
really
have to understand that the characters are all Marvel, but each run is going to be different.
To that creative, the person who's writing it can write and submit their stories however they want. And if they like it, if it's not off the wall, if it's not doing something detrimental to the character, they're going to let them do it. And that's just, itself is self-contained, but sometimes it's part of the larger comic universe. But sometimes it's just self-contained and they just do what they want.
So is that kind of where the cliche is no comic book character ever stays dead?
Correct.
Because one writer could kill a character off, and then the next writer could pick up another story and say, well, no, I don't want him dead. I want to use that character in my story. So all of a sudden they're back to life because it's 2 different stories.
Right.
Using the same characters, but 2 different stories.
And there have been instances where when they kill a character, they wipe them off the board unilaterally. Just everybody just no longer use them. Fantastic Four was like that. Jean Grey, for the longest time, was like that, but not so much anymore. I say that, but then now they're using her again in other forms. Professor X is dead. Nobody uses him anymore.
I know one I've heard that stays dead is Uncle Ben.
Yes. Once, even then, no. So Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon kind of put an end to that.
So there are no rules, basically. There are no rules.
There was a Spider-Man's Uncle Ben in Spider-Geddon.
I can't get on board with that.
So
it was weird.
I think that's important because that's something that turned me off at the very beginning. To understand, you just have to read each issue and run as its own.
Yes.
You just have to enjoy it. But I do know, like the Guardian series that I'm reading, they keep referencing things in other runs.
Right.
So they mentioned like Gamora is not present right now, and they said, is Gamora still helping Thanos cite Infinity Wars run 1 through 6.
Yeah.
So I immediately went and bought those so I could understand what they were talking about.
And the one that you're on right now came out before Endgame came out. And in the comic, she actually does the same thing with a katana, and she takes Thanos' head off. And then comes out Endgame, Thor takes his head off. So he had same death in two different things, but they were not related in any story capacity whatsoever. But his death was similar in two different things.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very interesting, that they did that also. So, but she was using the Infinity Gems. That's how she killed him. She was using the Power Stone.
Alright, so now that we kind of got an understanding of how each run goes and how they're all self-contained stories for the most part, so like, what are there any like classic storylines that if you're wanting to dive into a particular character that you should be looking for? Something that's going to give you a good idea of who the character is, what they're like, something that like sets up a lot of different other runs in the future. What are some of those? I mean, obviously, I think like Civil War is obviously a big one, which of course they adapted into the MCU.
Which
that.
was funny, and I was going to say that too. The Ultron story was probably the closest to the comics than the rest of the Avengers movies, or even.
Is that why it's the worst Avengers movie?
Very possible. But Civil War, nothing like it. You had notions of it where they were split over what they should do on the Accords. That was the only thing that was similar to the comics. Even the Infinity War in Endgame, nothing like it. The actual, but you can't do stuff like there's certain stuff that you can't do in real life that you can do in a comic.
Well, I know, like in the Civil War comic, from what I understand, the whole thing is, I mean, the government's wanting them to register so they know who the secret identities are, right?
Kind of. A group of young, powered individuals. I can't remember if I don't think they're young Avengers, but one of them can't control his powers that great, where he should have been under adult supervision to help train his powers. And he goes and they're fighting someone and he explodes and he blows up like a community college and kills hundreds.
So, I mean, that is similar to Civil War, the movie, with Scarlet Witch. She's still learning her powers.
Yes.
She puts crossbones in that little bubble and floats them up and ends up blowing up a building.
Right.
So very similar storylines, but different
contexts.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean,
when I was thinking about this, when Mel was going over the points with me about classic storylines, it's easy to say Infinity Wars. Everybody, this is a hot ticket right now since the movie's out. Everybody wants to that's the story you should read. It's good. But for your modern reader, it's read something else. Read another blockbuster. I came up with about 5 or 6 modern blockbuster events, summer and fall blockbuster events that I thought were more important to the modern reader that I suggest that they should be read than older stuff. Original Sin. Uatu.
Oh, never mind. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
That's not an X-Men storyline, though.
It's not, no.
Okay. So, I was thinking it was for some reason.
Original Sin was a story where someone kills Uatu, the Watcher, and uses his eyes to show people their original sins and where they went wrong and why they're not good people. And it drives people mad. It makes Thor unworthy of his hammer. Someone whispers in his ear the secret while holding the eye. Whispers in his ear the secret or whatever. They never say what it was. He drops the hammer and can't pick it back up.
All right.
And that's also where we find out he has a what's his face? Odin's greatest original sin was they had a daughter that he traded in to keep peace, traded to the 10th realm that he sealed off, and she was raised by the angels of heaven, the 10th realm, and that was his greatest sin. It's really cool. It's really in depth. You learn about the man on the wall. Look that up. It's so cool. Man on the wall is Nick Fury.
Well, don't spoil the whole thing for us.
Nick Fury is not Nick Fury.
Stop talking. Just tell us what stories to read.
Anyways, it's really cool. Seriously, dive into it. It's deep. You'll go forever. Fear Itself, and I have the trade at the house. I'll let y'all borrow that. It's really cool.
All of our listeners, they can borrow it.
Yes, I was meaning the two of you that I'm looking at, but okay. Yes, we could. If you want to call us or email us, I will send it to you and pass it around. Write your name on the front cover. Infinity, which I really thought they were going to adapt more into the movie that they came out, the two movies they came out with. They borrowed from Infinity, the comic. There's a 6-issue set called Infinity, and I'll let you borrow, but you gave it back to me. It was those that you gave back to me.
Yeah, I tried to read. Those were so confusing.
Yeah,
they really were. Like, it jumped all over the place.
If you don't know going into it, and I should have known that, if you didn't know kind of what was going on,
yeah, I was lost. I got like 3 issues in, and I was like, I have no idea what's going on, so I just put them down. And
it's if you get the context, maybe if you read them now and they give more context about Thanos and the Black Order, you might be able to get a little more out of it than you did. But maybe also you needed some tie-in issues, which I don't have. I just have the main 6 issues. But the Infinity, Thanos has a son who's an Inhuman. And he wants to kill his son, so he creates this giant elaborate ruse just so he can get to his son. So someone can slip up so he can go kill his kid. Thane.
oh, yeah, that's wholesome and nice.
Right, yeah.
Dad of the year.
Have you seen the movies? He clearly hates his kids. But this one's actually his actual blood child. Rather than that kid that he stole and made into a murder machine. So alright, the next one is one of the first comics I ever read in comic series. Probably the first summer blockbuster I ever read. Avengers vs. X-Men. And that one sets up a ton of stuff and goes in all sorts of directions and has really deep roots in all of the X-Men comics after that. It involves Hope Summers, which is the kid of Scott and Jean Grey, that Nathan takes to the future, Cable, takes to the future to raise as his daughter, to keep her safe.
But that's really his sister, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's very confusing. Don't worry about that part of it. But that one is crazy, and she's supposed to be the savior of all X-Men. Like, she was the last mutant born or something like that. And since her, no other mutants have been born.
I will say, out of the 4 that you've told us about, there's a lot of parental issues in here.
Most comics, are like that. I'm being completely honest with you.
Odin just sacrificing his daughter.
Yeah.
Thanos trying to kill his kid. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of daddy issues.
No, absolutely. You'll find that. There's not a lot of mom issues. Mom's usually the good person. It's usually the dad's evil. But that was the first one I ever read. I picked it up probably the very first printing of the first issue. And I think those went 5 or 6 printings or something like that each issue. It was a big event. Big event. The last one I would recommend, The Destruction of the Multiverse. Secret Wars 2015. They destroyed everything. They had Hickman's Avengers run that ended in 2015. He had this storyline where all of the multiverses, all the verses, started hitting each other and slamming into each other and destroying worlds and destroying Earths all over the multiverse. It was collapsing. And it came down to our Earth, 616. And they didn't save anything, everything got destroyed.
Did you just spoil it again?
It's not spoiling, man. It came out 5 years ago. That's not my problem.
But we haven't read it yet.
That's not my problem.
That's the whole point of this episode.
I'm not kidding. It's 45 issues. You see it coming from issue 1. They tell you in issue 1 everything's gonna die.
I'm done. I'm walking out. I'm done.
No, that's just the premise of it. The actual Secret Wars, the rest of it. I think I might have texted y'all about it. About how it actually happened, what goes on after the multiverse is destroyed, and how they bring it back. See, after that, during Secret Wars, is how they actually create the multiverse back, and that is the coolest part of it.
Alright.
And I won't tell you. But those 5 right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, those 5, I think are modern classics that need to be read by your modern comic book reader.
So obviously you're a Marvel guy, not so much DC.
I have one comic that's DC that's still running. I was reading Green Arrow and Flash. Green Arrow, up and stopped. Middle of a story. Just, this is the last issue, or see you bye. That was it. I wrapped it up and walked away.
So it's kind of like their movies.
Yeah, and the TV show too. Yeah. But Flash, the comic, that's the only non-Marvel one that I read. I just like their stories better.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to personal preference. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I haven't been reading comics, but, I grew up watching the TV shows and everything like that. I like Batman. He's a DC guy. There's obviously, Batman's one of the most historic characters that they've ever created. I'm not too much into Superman. There's too much with Superman going on. I don't know what it is.
I like Batman and Superman movies. I don't like their comics.
I've never read any Batman comics, but...
Yeah.
So, another question I had. So, like Avengers, obviously it's a team-based comic, and it's, rotating team. They're always changing them out, everything like that. Are there any, do you need to be familiar with the individual heroes or characters before you jump into an Avengers comic? So, do you need to read up and get familiar with Iron Man's backstory, or Thor's backstory, or the Hulk, or Captain America? Do you need to at least be familiar with them before you start an Avengers comic or any other team-based comic? Or can you just jump into it fresh and just figure it out on your own?
I wrote down, figure it out on your own. I think when it comes down to it, if you know enough that you want to read it, you know enough to understand it. Does that make sense?
I can say, and I hate to keep referencing the same one, but Hawkeye vs. Deadpool,
Yeah.
Kate Bishop is in there. I'm familiar with her name because we assume that's what the new Hawkeye series is going to be about.
Right.
But I don't understand, she's the same age as Clint in this one. Or, around the same age. They're both
Interesting. Okay.
They're both adults
Okay.
in this one. So, I think in that case, Google is your friend.
Yes.
Just to understand where has she appeared before, what's kind of the general premise of it, and then after that, it all makes sense.
Yeah. The Avengers comic that's current right now is not your standard lineup. There's Black Panther is now the president leader of the Avengers, and everybody else is a not side character, but Captain America shows up, has a couple lines. That's it. He's not the leader. He's not up in the forefront. Iron Man's the same way. He'll show up every now and then when they're fighting a bad guy. He talks, he has stories, he has issues that are some dedicated just to him, but he's not the focus of it. And I think the new Avengers comic is pretty good about that, but it's not about one person. Each issue is involving 2 or 3 other different people, rotating who's in the forefront. But I don't think you need to know. I think at this point in the world, in pop culture, everybody knows something about it.
Well, see, that we talked about
There's so much exposure now.
The comics that you gave me, it was about a year ago. It was around when Infinity War came out.
Yeah.
where I got so confused was in that story, it's not the main line of Avengers. It's not people that I was familiar with.
Right.
So there was characters popping up and you talking. I'm like, I don't know who this guy is.
That had more to do. It was more of a galactic story than a Earth-based story. Yeah.
That might have been where I got so confused. Was like, and the other thing is like they weren't referencing them by name.
Right.
So you had to like they're just talking to this random person that you've never seen before. So like, especially when they're using like not as the forefront characters
right.
like your Iron Man, your Captain America, stuff like that. To me, that got very confusing because I was sitting there reading and I'm like, okay, who is this person? What importance do they have? Are they an Avenger? Are they a bad guy? What's going on? So that's, to me, it got a little overwhelming. That's why I got just frustrated with it and just stopped reading it because I could not figure out who these secondary characters, and maybe not secondary characters, but maybe not as well known.
The main character of it, yeah. There is a page in the front of most Marvel issues, especially if it's going to be in an event and it have multiple characters. There is a page up front that tells you who's in the issue and what their name is. And it has like a little circle like, appearing in this episode. And it names off all the people that are in it.
I think just from I'm reading 3 different issues, I guess, right now. 3 different runs. The writers, some are better than others. So the Guardians one, they're not great about explaining who people are. But the Hawkeye vs. Deadpool writers did a
little
job.
better about it.
Yeah, of explaining who. Yeah, I've seen it, the Star Wars ones have it in there.
Okay.
But so
see, just like that.
So this is issue number 2 of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, which is the kind of preview comic to Galaxy's Edge. Gives a little bit of backstory of what you're going to be stepping into. And on the second page, when you open up, it has Doc Ondar, Remix, Kendo, and Wuro, I guess? I don't know. It's Wooro.
That's my best guess, yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess, at least you know their names, but still, you don't know, like, any of their backstory, which hopefully it explains it in the comic, but...
Even then, I don't, like, when I'm reading a comic, if I really like them, I'll look them up. But if not, they're just there and they're just part of the story. I don't need, like, where they were born and what their mom's name was. Yeah,
but if they have daddy issues, you need to know.
You can go ahead and rest assured they all have daddy issues. I go ahead and guarantee you that. What else does we have that?
I think we've covered a lot.
I think there was one more that I was going to ask, but I don't know if I can find it right now.
I mean, I would say just like, from my point of view, I'm just getting started. I just went into the shop, found titles that I was familiar with. It said Guardians of the Galaxy in huge letters, and I said, I know them. I will start reading this one. It had a number 1 on it and said, this is a great place to start.
I remember the question I was going to ask.
Yes.
So, part of Free Comic Book Day, one of the free comics was a Thor comic that War of the Realms.
Yes.
Is that what it's called?
Yes.
And you said that's their big blockbuster event for the summer.
Right.
So, when we went back last night... Oh, that's random.
That is weird.
You guys might have picked up some background noise of the ice cream.
We actually had an ice cream truck driving around. I haven't seen one in years. It's probably been about 10 years.
I was like, what is that noise?
Okay, so back to War of the Realms. So, whenever I first picked up the free comic, I assumed War of the Realms was going to be a Thor storyline.
Right.
We go back in last night, and you're kind of showing me around, and there are literally dozens of comics. I mean,
it's a
50, 60 different comics that had War of the Realms on the top. And it ranged from everything. Iron Man, Spider-Man, everything. Guardians of the Galaxy. So,
as Guardians of the Galaxy.
So, with those, is there any certain order you need to read those in? Or do you go, Thor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Iron Man, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'm glad you asked. HowToLoveComics.com will break it down as the story needs to be read as it's released. Because if you don't read the comics, if you don't have a pull box, Like right now, this is the first time I've ever done it. Usually I read I read what I read out of my pull box. And if it involves that blockbuster, I'll only read those tie-ins. And I'll read the main story. But this time, I knew War of the Realms was going to be so epically large. I told them, everything that has that title on it, throw it in my box.
So the story could skip around from character to character,
Yes.
run to run. So you might need to read Thor 1 and 2 and then go read Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and then, skip around to Spider-Man or whatever. So could you read them in order, like by character, or would the story not make sense at that point? Or...
No, if you're reading what you're reading, like say I'm reading Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy, and those two tie-in issues, I read them. They're a story self-contained issue that involves the larger entity, but it won't confuse you of the actual, like you're not missing anything. Like that's what when I gave you the Infinity ones, it's a self-contained story, but there's nuances of the story that you're not getting that comes in the main story, but you don't need to read every issue to get the whole story. Does that make sense?
Real quick before we move too quick, we threw out another term that we did not cover as pull box. So it's essentially just at your local store, you can set it up where if you're getting enough issues every single month or every single week, whatever it is, of current runs going on, then they will go ahead and pull those aside for you. So as soon as you go in, they just hand you your stuff, you pay for them, and then you leave.
Correct.
Our store does a minimum of 10, or is it a minimum of 5?
Minimum 5.
A little too much for me right now, but it is something to explore. If you don't want to have to hunt for the big name.
When you say minimum of 5, is that 5 runs that you're reading?
5 titles.
5 titles that you're reading at the moment, basically. So it could be Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge, Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor,
yes.
And as long as
Star
you're reading
Wars
5
titles,
they'll pull all of those for you.
Yes.
So you can't just go and say, I just want to read this one thing. They're saying, well, too bad, you're out of luck. You gotta find it on your own.
You can add and drop as frequent as you want. But as long as you have a minimum of 5 titles that you're currently being put into your box every Wednesday.
And then you have you get a discount at most stores as well.
Yes, I think Rick's is 10 or 20%.
So, I mean, every store is set up a little bit differently.
Correct.
So, at our local shop, which we keep referencing as Rick's, do they charge you to set up a box, or
He has you put down a down payment
okay,
of
$20.
$20. And that's only to cover, say, he could have sold, we have a major event coming, right? Say Guardians of the Galaxy is the new hot thing, and everybody wants it, and he's sold out, but you have that one issue in your box.
So that guarantees that he's going to sell that.
Right. He could have sold this to someone else, but you decided not to come back to your box, and now he can't get rid of it. So now he has it.
How often will he hold it, or how long will he hold it for you?
I think our terms are 3 weeks. If your box comes unclaimed for 3 weeks, or maybe a month, that they'll call it abandoned.
And put all the...
Keep your money, and then put your comics back up on the shelf.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. But, if you ever close it out, like if I go in there and I'm like, hey man, I'm not collecting comics anymore, or hey, I'm moving, they'll give me my $20 back.
So the $20 is just to ensure that he can
Get his money back on wasted comics.
On what he
right.
would potentially be able to sell.
Say he had this in my box, and he can get $4 for it to the average person walking in the door, but it's been in my box for a month or two, and now he can only get $2.50 for it. He's losing money. Yeah. So that's saving the insurance of just leaving junk in a pull box.
I think it was a pretty comprehensive guide. I think there's some good launching points. Of course, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us on Instagram or Twitter. Instagram as @Kingdom Outcast, Twitter is at KOutcastPod. And if it happens to be myself or Jordan who reads them, we will make sure that Greg gets in there and gives you the appropriate answer.
Or I can just make something up on the spot and send you on your way.
I'm looking forward to that. Let's do that.
Yeah. So I'm interested, and I think we're all interested in what runs are you currently reading? And what titles are you interested in? How are you gearing up for Phase 4 of the MCU if you're trying to? That's my approach. I'm trying to study up on some of the characters that we're going to learn more about, just so I have some more background information. So, thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week with episode number 20.